Activate Your Introvert, the weekly show to help leaders build performance by understanding introversion. In this week's show, Leadership Tip of the Week, Understanding Understatement, a discussion with Chris Budd. Chris is one of the UK's experts on employee ownership. He also writes books on money, unhappiness, and of course employee ownership, as well as a lot of novels. Question of the week: how can I tell if somebody is introverted or extroverted? An introvert myth of the week: introverts can't network. Did you also smile at a piece of news mentioning the Queen this week? It certainly made me smile. And I must say, before talking about the piece in the news, I have absolutely no idea if the Queen is an introvert or an extrovert, but her very understated and non-egotistical answer really made me smile. Apparently the Queen, whilst in Balmoral, was once approached by some US tourists. Failing to recognise her off-duty, they asked her if she had ever met the Queen. No, she replied, before gesturing to her protection officer and saying, but he has. Many introverts tend to understate themselves and their achievements. If you're an introvert, think for a moment if that's actually serving you. If you're a non-introverted leader, it's something to look out for. A personal example might help here. A few years ago, I, along with some friends, completed the dive instruction qualification, which I was very pleased with. In the pub that night, I was asked about it and replied, "It's good, and I'm pleased." My extroverted friend talked about how hard it was, many of the challenges she went through to get it, and how she felt about achieving it. And I reflected as I listened. It meant the same to both of us, and we both did exactly the same challenges. Worse was yet to come. Later on, my friend was basking in the limelight from people, admiring the achievement over those challenges, and nobody said anything to me. How did I feel? Bit fed up, if I'm honest. Whose fault was it? Well, let's be honest, largely mine. But in a work situation, would people have got the most from me? And that's where you need to think about it as a leader as well as an introvert. I'd love to see your thoughts on the subject on the Facebook page, as I found many introverts are similar to me in this regard. Do you agree? Does that mean managers need to consider understatement? Yes, if you want to get the most from people. What would you like to know about introversion in business? This week's question comes from Dave. How can I tell if somebody is introverted or extroverted? It's a great question, Dave, and it's very important if you're running a business and want to get the most from your team. On one of my dives this week, I was floating along under the English Channel when I watched what may be one of the introverts of the undersea world. A cuttlefish, changing colour in front of me, attempting to blend into the background. Flounders and many other fish are designed to look like their background and make it hard to see. And I think many introverts can be like this, due to an extroverted bias in Western business world. That leads many introverts to attempt to behave like extroverts, and thus being hidden in plain sight. So, what can you do? Well, there's a couple of telltales that may help, but I stress, one of them alone doesn't make somebody an introvert. Just use the signs, combine them, and consider, and then maybe adapt your behaviour towards them as you mentally go, maybe they are introverted, and maybe there are things I could do differently. Do they hang back at networking meetings, or the ones that tend to be on the edges of the group? Do they talk to think, or think to talk? Are they more social with friends than they are with your team and other people that they don't know as well? Do they check their phone quietly when alone at events, as opposed to some people who check their phone and proclaim what amazing things they've just learned? Because adding those signs together, they may well be introverted. What question would you like answered on the show? Whether you want to be on the show or just have your question answered like Dave, go to activateyourintrovert.co.uk where there's a box for you to ask your question. You could also follow on Facebook and discuss the answers at the show's page. Activate Your Introvert. The mission of this show is to help you understanding introversion and building your business. But now it's time to chat with Chris.
Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, John.
We first met on Twitter, that great place where everyone meets and never normally goes any further. You had written an article about high-functioning introverts, which I'd love to come back to in a couple of minutes. Just before we do that, are you an introvert or an extrovert? And probably more importantly, what does that mean to you?
I would call myself an introvert, although a lot of people would be surprised when I say that, because I do a lot of speaking, played in a band on stage. I've got a lot of opinions and I'm not afraid to share them. But the way I kind of put it is that I love being on stage, but I'm quite happy at the back. I love sharing ideas and I love being involved in things, but only when it's about the thing, not when it's about me. The kind of cult of personality that makes things about the person, not about the thing the person has done, makes me exceptionally uncomfortable. So that's what tells me that I'm an introvert.
That's really interesting, because I have a very similar feeling, but your distinction there, you love being on stage when it's about something or about the audience, but not about you. I know many introverts who could definitely empathize with that. And when I've spoken to them and talked about being on stage, oh, I couldn't be on stage. And I've kind of expressed it not as eloquently as you did just there. And they've suddenly got that difference. But of course, in a sense, we're talking about having big egos, I guess, and many introverts don't have, although it's not really what you normally see as part of the definition of introversion. Do you think there's a connection in that?
I think probably is, yes. I would stress to your listeners, I'm no expert on this topic. I'm just talking about my personal experience, really. So I'm no professor of introversion. I just know that when I was playing, for example, in a band on stage, and I was the guitarist, the only guitarist, and I remember one particular occasion, a very early gig that we played, but it came to my solo, and so I was playing the solo, and I just happened to look up, and there were two blokes at the back of the hall, just kind of staring, arms folded, just staring at my left hand that I was playing. And I immediately turned away. What are you looking at me for? You know, I want you to be dancing and have a good time. That's what I love. I love being in a band on stage so I can make a party happen and I can see everybody having a great time. But as soon as it's over, I'm quite happy to slink off back in the van. I don't need everybody coming up and saying, well done. That's not what it's about. It's about making fun happen, creating ideas, getting people to think. That for me is really stimulating and I enjoy it. But I don't particularly, I mean, some applause is nice, of course it is, and a well done every once in a while is nice, but I don't get very uncomfortable when the whole thing is then made of being about me.
Really interesting. No, thank you. The high functioning introvert, where did that come from?
So that's what somebody called me once, and I looked it up and I thought, yeah, that's about right. It kind of describes what I've just been talking about, really. I'm not an introvert that has to sit at home and doesn't like to speak to people, as you might kind of very cliched version of an introvert might be. I'm an introvert that likes to be out and sharing ideas and talking to people, which is the high functioning aspect of it. Somebody else gave a definition of an introvert as being what you do when you want to recover. Is your recovery time spent with other people or on your own? And mine's very much on my own. So that's another way of defining an introvert.
Yeah, that's certainly the base level one that I and many other people would go back to. Perhaps we'll just talk a bit more about your high functioning bit. Really, I heard you say something that many introverts would go, really? Or even more interestingly, many extroverts would go, Chris, you can't possibly be an introvert if you like going out and about and mixing with people and sharing ideas. Tell us a bit more about that.
I just know that I do a lot of keynote speaking, a lot of speaking on stage. I've spoken in front of 500, 600, 700 people, and I'm very comfortable doing it. I enjoy it. And I enjoy it when you get off stage and then you go and have a cup of coffee and somebody comes over and says, that point you made about so-and-so, could you explain a bit? If somebody comes up and says, I thought you were great on stage, Chris. I think one person I remember once said, you should be on telly. And I immediately shrank back because it's not supposed to be about me. I don't really get nervous when I'm on stage. I always remember being in the band, and one of the things that I learned very early on is that I only ever got nervous when I wasn't prepared.
Yeah.
So if I was fully prepared and we knew all the songs, we'd rehearsed them loads of times, if anything went wrong, it wouldn't have been my fault. And therefore, there's nothing to get nervous about. So as long as I know what I'm doing and I can do the stuff, and then I can be at the back watching the party happen, or I can be up on stage talking about the subject which people are interested in, or giving them ideas that they haven't had before, absolutely love that place. But as soon as the spotlight comes on to me personally, I immediately shrink away from that. So that for me is what that high functioning introvert means.
That's superb. And I would completely endorse from everything you've said that you are introverted, and in many ways, like many other introverts, which I think this is a great conversation, because it's going to help people look at some people and go, oh, they can't be introverts, because I find many leaders that just don't understand introversion. Many people that run businesses that have got staff that don't really understand it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of business leaders, and particularly, employee ownership work, I work a lot with business owners. I mean, that's bad. It's succession planning for business owners into the Employee Ownership Trust. I'm one of the UK's foremost experts, which is, since there's only about 5 of us, it's not that big a statement. But a lot of business owners are very extroverted, very strong characters. Not that the two necessarily have to go hand in hand. They do tend to think that everybody should be like them. I know that's a generalization, but I don't feel that there's a great deal of understanding of what an introvert and the unique needs of an introvert. Thinking of one conversation I had today, I was coaching an employee of a company who's going into employee ownership, and her boss was trying to tell her what to be like. And it's not who she was, it was what the boss was like. You see what I mean? So they weren't coaching or training, they were just telling.
Yes.
And it was causing all sorts of problem and upset, but the boss would have no idea about any of this stuff because they just weren't very emotionally intelligent, very emotionally aware. So yes, I absolutely recognize that many business leaders just don't really get the importance of understanding each individual and how they'll receive information.
And what difference do you think that makes to the business?
Well, you have poor performing people, you have unhappy people. And by the way, I'm very much aware, might just have one of my ex-employees listen to this going, oh, yeah, right, mate. Because I'm not sure I would have recognized any of this when I was a boss either. I'd like to think I was better than many, but I'm sure I made huge mistakes. Just actually worked really nicely with employee ownership, because employee ownership is all about understanding all of the employees working together to make a more effective unit when they come together. And that means understanding, for example, that people receive information in different ways. Many business leaders or bosses who don't understand this stuff will just give people in the way that they want to receive it. I'll give you another quick story, actually, about introversion. That's not about how I wasn't noticing it. After I sold the business to the Employee Ownership Trust, I carried on being involved in marketing meetings at the employee's request. After 6 months, the new managing director who took over from me asked me to leave the meetings, not be involved anymore. And I was a bit upset. And I said, why? And he said, because you're dominating them. And I said, but I'm not saying anything. I'm trying really hard, to just, offer a suggestion here and there, but not take over. And he said, I know, and you're doing that really well, but you're the founder of the company.
Yeah.
You're the visionary of the company. And in the last marketing meeting that we had, he told me, I was there for the first hour, hardly said a word. I had to leave early to go to a meeting. And after I left, everybody started talking.
Wow.
Because I was the person that had invented everything that we do. And therefore, everybody was a bit worried about saying anything.
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily because I was going to shout them down or anything. It's just they were waiting for me to take the lead.
I guess it's natural, isn't it? You've become the dominant, if I can put it like that, personality, and they're used to that happening.
Some of the best people now in Ovation, my old financial planning company, so the best in terms of the contribution to ideas, etc., are people who had never said anything before. And they're fantastic. And they've got loads of ideas because the new managing director is much better at me than I was at allowing them to have a voice and to be heard. Those introverts in those meetings now are being heard much more than when I was the boss.
So one of the big things then with understanding introversion as a leader, you're going to get your team to talk up more, you're going to get more ideas, and I guess more productivity and employee engagement as a result.
Yeah, and employee engagement is a really hot topic in that circle, employee ownership. And so many business owners, after they've sold, carry on being the managing director or what have you. And they don't realize that just their presence will dampen some of the voice, some of the employee engagement. And it's not their fault, it's nothing they're doing, it's just the situation that they're in. So, but the other thing about it, I just wanted to add, is that employee engagement is also about the employees really enjoying their work. So as well as being good for the business, it's also good for them. Because
that's a really good point. Yeah.
Because they, especially if you have a very purposeful business, what the business purpose is, the flag, what we call the flag in the ground around which everyone gathers. And if you have a high alignment between employees' individual purpose with the company flag, the company purpose, then that can be a really, really powerful way of getting highly motivated people who enjoy their jobs. And if they will then be more likely to want to contribute and have a voice. And so the whole thing comes together with the introversion to allow that to come out as well. And you start to get some really powerful effect.
Fabulous. So we're coming to the end. So I'm going to quickly ask for a couple of tips. A tip for an introvert in business.
Do recognize that your voice is still valued. Brilliant. And find a way to have it heard. And it might not be in a meeting to speak up in front of everybody, but there might be other ways. But just because you're a sort of person who doesn't want to necessarily put it forward doesn't mean it's not still valuable. It is. Recognize that.
I like that. And how about a non-introvert? Perhaps you touched on some of it already. As a leader of the business, I'm not introverted, but ...
I would suggest, and again, I have absolutely no evidence for this, but I would suggest that extroverts don't recognize introverts. And it's just a question of looking around you and being aware that we're not all the same. Other people have different needs. Introverts recognize extroverts. Do extroverts recognize introverts? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, interesting. And so basically what you're saying there is, as a non-introvert, in fact, it's probably something we could all do, be aware of the differences in the people around you.
And the attitude you see isn't people not wanting to step up or not wanting to get involved. It's not feeling that they're able to.
Thank you. Chris, I'm sure some of the listeners will want to get back in touch with you after listening. What's the best way for them to find you?
I do a few different things. One of my favorite topics is around money and happiness. And we do a podcast called the Financial Wellbeing Podcast. I wrote a book called the Financial Wellbeing Book, and there's 70 odd episodes of that podcast. So they might be interested in that. And if it's employee ownership, then theeternalbusiness.com is a website which is all about that. Oh, and they could also go to Amazon and buy my novels. That'd be the best of all, because that's the bit that I get really passionate about.
Loads of ways that can get better. I love it. Chris, thank you very much for your time today. It's been brilliant to chat.
Thank you, John.
And now it's time for Introvert Myth of the Week. Those crazy stories that I hear and you hear that some people actually believe. Introverts are not good networkers. So I'll be honest and say I can really see why this one does the rounds. There are not many introverts I can think of who go, "Oh yes, let's go to a meeting with 50 people I don't know very well and chat to them all." But that's a meeting. It's not networking. Networking is developing relationships with those in your network. And not only do many introverts do that brilliantly by chatting one-to-one with people in their network, they've done better than normal over the last 18 months of the pandemic, developing relationships with people they already know. Why? Because they're interested in the people and the relationship, rather than the sometimes egotistical posturing of a meeting. But think about that. That's something we could all do. Focus on the one-to-one discussions and develop the quality of the relationship with the people that are most important to you. Who is most important to you? What have you done to improve that relationship in the last month or so? That's the real question we should be asking. Introverts and networking? Yes, you can. I'm John Baker. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful. There's a new episode every Thursday at activateyourintrovert.co.uk and your favourite podcast provider. Till then, go be introversial, activating your introverts, building your business.